Welcome to Pivot Point History. I want you to just, step out of your current reality for a moment.
Yeah, just leave it all behind.
Exactly. Step away from the lights, the modern noise, and, the immediate concerns of your day. Let yourself be transported across centuries to a morning where the air is heavy. It's cold and unnervingly still. It is September 26, 1396.
Right?
The dawn is just beginning to break over this sprawling field in Bulgaria. But the morning mist rolling off the dark waters of the river Danube doesn't smell like damp earth.
No, not at all.
No, it smells entirely of blood. It is this thick, metallic, suffocating scent that catches in the back of your throat, and it just refuses to leave.
It's visceral.
Yeah, it really is. And you're standing in this muddy, violently trampled field, and you're experiencing this exact moment entirely through the eyes of a 16-year-old Bavarian boy named Johann.
Just a teenager.
Just a kid. His hands are bound tightly behind his back, the rough, coarse fibers of the cord just whiting deep into his wrists. And he's shivering.
Right, from the cold, but also the shock.
Exactly. Partly from the biting morning chill seeping through his thin tunic, but mostly, it is from a bone-deep, paralyzing terror.
Oh, absolutely.
Because young Johann is standing in this long, ragged line of men. And just a few paces ahead of him, he is watching executioners systematically, methodically, and without a trace of hesitation, behead his friends.
His mentors, his comrades, everyone.
It's horrific.
It is a profoundly chilling, suffocating scene. The methodical nature of it is what makes it so terrifying, honestly. There is no heat of battle here.
Right, the battle's over.
Yeah, this is the cold, calculated arithmetic of revenge.
You watch with Johann. One by one, you hear the heavy, sickening thud of the steel blade sinking into flesh and wood. You see the sudden spray of crimson just painting the mud.
Yeah.
You watch bodies being casually dragged away by their boots simply to make room for the next man in line. And Johann knows, with this absolute certainty of a cornered animal, that he is only moments away from his own death.
And he's 16.
16. His life is about to end on a foreign field, 1,000 miles from home.
The sheer scale of the slaughter happening on that field is almost difficult for the modern mind to even comprehend. This execution line didn't just last for a few minutes.
No, it went on forever.
Blood spilled continuously from the early morning mist until the late afternoon sun began to set. This wasn't a mere border skirmish,
Right.
It wasn't a localized tragedy that history just footnoted. What young Johann is witnessing, what he is entirely trapped within, is the catastrophic, overnight unraveling of an entire civilization's military might.
And that is the mission of our deep dive today. We are taking an immersive, unbroken, deeply atmospheric journey into the Battle of Nicopolis.
We really are.
But we aren't going to just look at troop movements on a flat map or recite dates from a distance. We are going to explore this monumental, world-shattering clash entirely through the immediate, terrifying reality of young Johann.
We're walking right beside him.
Exactly. We are going to trace his steps from the day he left his quiet, familiar home in Bavaria. We'll follow the disastrous, deeply flawed army he marched with.
Such a flawed army.
We'll plunge into the terrifying, claustrophobic chaos of his capture and uncover the unimaginable reality of the 30-year captivity that awaited him.
And to truly grasp why this matters to you, to understand the massive geopolitical earthquake that originated on that blood-soaked Bulgarian field, we really must first pull back and look at the macro picture.
We have to set the stage.
Right, because this isn't just one teenager's tragic ordeal. The Battle of Nicopolis was the very first massive coordinated collision between two entirely different worlds.
Two completely different ways of waging war.
Precisely. On one side, you had the centralizing, heavily armored chivalric powers of Western Europe, and on the other, the rapidly expanding, highly disciplined, tactically fluid Ottoman Empire.
The unstoppable force meeting the immovable object.
Exactly. And this battle is the precise moment the Ottomans cemented their status. They proved they were no longer just a regional nuisance chewing at the edges of the fading Byzantine Empire. They established themselves as a terrifying global superpower. Nicopolis is the anvil upon which the back of Christian resistance in the East was broken for half a century.
It left a psychological scar on Europe so deep, so profound, that it altered the trajectory of global history. And to understand the sheer scale of this catastrophe, to understand exactly how the absolute flower of European chivalry ended up bound and bleeding in the mud, We have to deliberately slow down.
We have to strip away the neat textbook summaries.
Yes, entirely. We have to walk the muddy, chaotic road to Nicopolis ourselves. We have to feel the crushing weight of the plate armor, the bite of the Balkan cold, and, the absolute fatal blindness of institutional hubris.
So let us set the stage. The year is 1394.
Okay, 1394.
I want you to visualize the map of Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean. The Ottoman Turks, under the leadership of Sultan Bayezid I, are no longer a distant rumor whispered about in European courts.
They're a very real threat.
They are a relentless, highly organized military machine that has crossed into Europe and is advancing deep into the Balkans. They have systematically dismantled local resistance.
Right.
They have reduced the once mighty 1,000-year-old Byzantine Empire to practically nothing more than the city of Constantinople itself.
Just one city left.
And at this very moment, Bayezid is actively blockading that great city, slowly strangling it. So the front line between the expanding Islamic Empire and the Christian West is creeping dangerously, unavoidably close to the borders of the Kingdom of Hungary.
And King Sigismund of Hungary is looking at this map, and he is terrified.
Oh, absolutely terrified.
He realizes his kingdom is next on the chopping block, so he sounds the alarm. He sends these desperate embassies across Western Europe, begging the major powers for a unified front.
He needs help urgently.
Right, a massive, coordinated coalition to halt this Ottoman tide before it washes over Central Europe.
And what is fascinating here is how the geopolitical stars align to answer his plea. In a normal decade, Western Europe would have just ignored him.
Because they're usually fighting each other.
Exactly. England and France had been locked in the brutal, exhaustive 100 Years' War. But in 1394, they have hit a rare pause. A fragile truce has been signed.
Wow, okay.
So suddenly you have this massive population of heavily armored, battle-hardened French and Burgundian nobles, knights, and men-at-arms who have absolutely no one to fight.
Unemployed knights.
Right. And a knight without a war is a dangerous, restless entity. So they eagerly answer King Sigismund's call.
But they aren't just going out of pure religious piety, right? There is a massive financial engine behind this.
Oh, massive.
This expedition is heavily backed by the incredibly wealthy Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Bold.
Yes, and we must unpack this funding dynamic because it is the fatal flaw built right into the foundation of the campaign.
How so?
Well, the Duke of Burgundy is not going on this campaign himself. He is essentially bankrolling it to send his 24-year-old son John, Count of Nevers.
Okay.
Now, Duke Philip envisions this entire endeavor not as a grim, desperate, defensive war for the sheer survival of Eastern Europe.
Which it actually was for Sigismund.
Exactly. But Philip views it as an opulent, continent-spanning display of his own house's prestige and power. It is an exercise in massive self-magnification.
A PR stunt with swords.
Precisely. Because of this, the French and Burgundian contingents treat logistics, intelligence gathering, and pragmatic military strategy as entirely secondary concerns.
If they consider them at all.
Right. They are marching eastward, not to defend a border, but to win chivalric glory.
Which brings us down from the high courts of Burgundy right to the muddy boots of young Johann. So zoom in on a quiet estate in Bavaria near Munich in 1394.
Johann is a squire.
He's a squire. He's a runner and attendant for his local lord, a man named Leinhard Ricardingen. And Johann is 16 years old.
Just a kid.
Think about what your worldview was like at 16. I mean, your entire universe is your local town, your family, your immediate duties.
Very small world.
So when the call to arms from the Hungarian king filters down through the nobility and reaches his lord, Johann is told to pack his bags.
And for a boy of his age, in the socio-economic reality of the 14th century, leaving his local village to join a grand transnational army led by the most famous knights in all of Christendom.
The celebrities of the day.
Right. It would not have felt like marching into a geopolitical meat grinder. It would have felt like the ultimate glorious adventure. He was stepping into a living legend.
It's crucial we understand his mindset here. He's completely blissfully ignorant of the massive logistical nightmares and the clashing egos of the high command.
He has no idea.
He is just caught up in the sheer overwhelming pageantry of it all. Imagine the sensory experience for this teenager.
It would be mind-blowing.
The gleaming polished plate armor, the magnificent massive war horses bred specifically for shock combat, the towering, incredibly colorful silk banner snapping in the wind.
Yeah.
He is a small, eager cog in what appears to be the most awe-inspiring military machine ever assembled.
And we must concede what a breathtaking machine it appeared to be. If you were standing on the side of the road watching this army finally assemble in Buda, the capital of Hungary,
it would look unstoppable.
The illusion of complete unity and invincibility would have been overwhelming. You have King Sigismund's own Hungarian forces, men who were battle-hardened from brutal border skirmishes with Ottoman raiders.
They know the enemy.
Yes. You have the French and Burgundian heavy cavalry, who are universally considered the absolute pinnacle of medieval shock combat. You have specialized troops like Croatians, Wallachians.
Let me pause you there. We throw around names like Wallachians and Knights Hospitaller. Who exactly are these groups, and why are they there? It wasn't just French and Hungarians.
Not at all. It was a massive coalition. The Wallachians came from a frontier principality, modern-day southern Romania.
Okay.
They were essentially a buffer state. And they fought a completely different style of war than the heavy Western Knights. They fought as light cavalry and skirmishing infantry.
More mobile.
Right. They knew the terrain, and more importantly, they knew Ottoman tactics. Then you have the Knights Hospitaller. This was a fiercely dedicated military order of warrior monks who held the island of Rhodes.
The famous Crusader Knights.
Exactly. They were religious zealots, yes, but they were also highly experienced in Eastern naval combat and siege warfare.
Wow, quite the mix.
Add to this massive naval fleets dispatched by the merchant republics of Venice and Genoa to secure the Black Sea and the Danube River.
That is a massive scale.
Some chroniclers of the time were so utterly overwhelmed by the sheer, terrifying majesty of this sight that they claimed the army numbered 130,000 men.
Which is crazy for that era.
Even King Sigismund, swept up in the intoxicating arrogance of the moment, supposedly boasted that if the sky itself were to fall, the spears of his army would be enough to hold it up.
The atmosphere must have been electric, but also, intoxicatingly arrogant. Realistically, modern historians estimate we're probably looking at a force of maybe 15 to 20,000 actual combatants.
Still a very large army.
Right, which, we should be clear, for the late 14th century is still a massive, terrifyingly large host to keep fed and moving. But beneath the shiny armor, beneath the grand boasts and the snapping banners, there's a deep structural rot.
A fatal flaw.
Because the French and Burgundians, the core shock troops of this army, are not there to take orders from a Hungarian king.
No, absolutely not.
They are there to win personal glory, to outshine their rivals within their own ranks, and to definitively prove their chivalric superiority to the world. They are completely united in their vanity, but fatally divided in their command.
And that internal rot, that complete lack of a unified command structure, begins to show the very moment they move out of friendly territory and begin the slow, arduous march toward the Ottoman lines.
Let's talk about the physical reality of moving 20,000 men, thousands of horses, and camp followers across the 14th century Balkans.
Yeah.
Just crossing the Danube at a place called the Iron Gate takes them 8 full days.
8 days. The Iron Gate is a massive, treacherous gorge where the Danube River narrows violently between the Carpathian and Balkan mountains.
It sounds like a nightmare to cross.
The currents are deadly. To cross an army of this size requires complex pontoon bridges and a massive flotilla of boats. It is a severe logistical bottleneck.
And vulnerable.
In any standard military campaign, an army strung out across a river crossing is at its absolute most vulnerable. But the Crusader command is entirely unbothered.
They don't even care.
They post minimal guards. They do not scout aggressively. They simply do not respect their enemy enough to fear an ambush.
And their behavior as they actually enter the Balkans, the territory they are supposedly there to protect, is just horrific.
Oh, it's brutal.
You have to remember the stated goal. They are ostensibly marching as liberators, protecting local Christians from the advancing Islamic Empire. But instead of acting as disciplined saviors, the Crusader army, particularly the French and Burgundian contingents, descends into relentless, brutal pillaging.
Yes.
They're marching through lands that are caught in the crossfire, populated by Bulgarian Christians, and they act with absolute terrifying impunity.
We have to understand why medieval armies pillaged. It wasn't always just malice. It was often a crude form of logistics.
Right, feeding the army.
Supplying 20,000 men via wagon trains from Hungary was nearly impossible over those terrible roads. So armies lived off the land, which is a polite historical term for stealing every grain of wheat and slaughtering every farm animal they came across.
Right.
But the French forces took this standard brutality and elevated it to a sport.
And the indiscipline reaches a truly horrific crescendo at a town called Oryahovo, sometimes recorded as Rachowa. It is a fortified settlement that the Crusaders need to secure to protect their supply lines along the river.
And the siege of Oryahovo perfectly illustrates the broken command dynamics.
How so?
The French contingent, utterly desperate for the glory of a successful assault and the loot that comes with it, actually carries out a grueling forced night march to reach the walls before their Hungarian allies can even arrive.
Wow, they want to steal the spotlight.
They want the prize exclusively for themselves. They engage in fierce, bloody fighting at the bridge leading to the town, but they cannot break the main defenses until King Sigismund finally arrives with his infantry and siege engineers.
And this is where the campaign takes an incredibly dark, deeply cynical turn. King Sigismund, acting as a sovereign monarch who actually wants to integrate these lands and these people into his permanent defensive perimeter, does what any pragmatic ruler would do.
He negotiates.
He negotiates a peaceful surrender. He explicitly promises the inhabitants of Oryahovo, many of whom are local Christians living under an Ottoman garrison, that their lives and property will be entirely spared if they open the gates without further bloodshed.
It is a standard, intelligent military negotiation.
But the French knights are furious.
Beyond furious.
In their eyes, a negotiated surrender means they are robbed of their martial glory, and more importantly, they are robbed of the right to sack the city and claim the loot.
The wealth.
Right. So once the heavy wooden gates are opened under the sacred flag of truce, the French actively and deliberately break King Sigismund's agreement.
A huge violation.
They surge violently into the town. They pillage the homes, they massacre the inhabitants in the streets, they set the town ablaze, and they take 1,000 residents, both Turkish and Bulgarian, as hostages, binding them in chains to march with the army.
It's an absolute atrocity.
I have to stop and ask you here, because to a modern listener, this is completely baffling. If you are King Sigismund and your so-called allies, the people you literally beg to come help you, are actively breaking your treaties, burning the very towns you are trying to save, and slaughtering the local population,
Yeah.
how do you even maintain command? Why doesn't Sigismund arrest the French commanders? How does the army not just dissolve into a civil war right there in the smoldering ruins of Oryahovo?
That is the crucial question, and it strikes at the fatal flaw of the entire campaign. We are viewing this through a modern military lens, where a general has absolute authority over his subordinate.
Right, like a modern army.
Exactly. But 14th century armies operated on a decentralized, contract-based reality. Sigismund nominally has strategic command, but the complex social hierarchy of late medieval nobility completely prevents him from enforcing it.
So he's powerless.
Basically. The French force is officially commanded by the 24-year-old John, Count of Nevers. But John isn't really in charge. He has been surrounded by a committee of older, incredibly arrogant, high-status counselors.
Men with massive egos.
Men like Philip of Artois, who is the Constable of France, and Jean Lemang, known as Boucicaut, the Marshal of France.
These are huge titles. These are the celebrities of the medieval battlefield.
Precisely. And these men consider themselves the social, cultural, and martial superiors of a mere Eastern European king.
Wow.
The concept of a unified, strict chain of command simply did not exist in their chivalric worldview. To submit to Sigismund's discipline, to let a Hungarian king dictate how French nobles wage war, would be an intolerable insult to their honor.
So Sigismund is trapped.
Entirely trapped. He desperately needs their heavy cavalry to face the Ottomans, so he is forced to swallow the insult, grit his teeth, and watch his own authority crumble before his eyes.
So this is the toxic, fractured, blood-soaked environment young Johann is living in. He's a teenager, marching in the wake of this senseless destruction.
Seeing all this horror.
He is likely exhausted, spending his days carrying heavy armor, tending to war horses, constantly surrounded by older knights who are drunk on wine and their own perceived invincibility.
Yeah, it's a terrible situation.
And this bloated, arrogant, divided army finally reaches its ultimate target on September 12th. They arrive at the fortress of Nicopolis.
And Nicopolis is a formidable objective. If you picture it, it sits high on a steep, jagged limestone cliff directly overlooking the Danube River.
Not an easy target.
No, it is highly defensible, it has been well supplied for a siege, and it is garrisoned by a competent, veteran Turkish commander named Dogan Bey.
So he knows what he's doing.
Dogan knows his job isn't to defeat the Crusader army in the field. His job is simply to sit behind his walls and hold out until his Sultan, Bayezid, arrives.
And here's the dark, almost comedic punchline to the Crusaders' grand continent-spanning march. Are you ready?
Let's hear it.
They brought absolutely no siege engines. None.
It's absurd.
They marched hundreds of miles across Europe to take a fortified stone cliff, and they didn't bring catapults. They didn't bring trebuchets.
And we must explain why. Again, it comes down to the logistics and the mindset.
Okay, lay it on me.
Transporting heavy timber siege engines across the terrible roads of the Balkans was incredibly slow and expensive. But more than that, the French knights fundamentally despised siege warfare.
It wasn't glamorous enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sitting in the mud for months, starving out a garrison didn't win you glory in the courts of Paris. Field battles, glorious open field cavalry charges were what mattered. One of the French commanders actually boasts outside the walls of Nicopolis that brave men equipped with ladders are worth more than any catapult. It's a stunning rejection of military reality.
So, entirely unable to breach the thick stone walls, they simply surround the town, set up their massive, sprawling camp, and settle in for blockade. And this blockade almost immediately devolves into a 2-week-long decadent festival.
Just a massive party.
Yeah. The atmosphere in the Crusader camp is one of absolute delusion. They are utterly convinced that the Ottoman Sultan, Bayezid, is a coward who will never dare face the combined might of Western chivalry in the open field.
Which is so wrong.
Because they believe this so deeply, they abandon basic military doctrine. They post no long-range sentries. They do not send out coordinated scouting parties.
They're just sitting there.
They spend their days drinking heavily from the looted wine cellars of the region, feasting, playing dice, employing prostitutes, and loudly mocking the martial prowess of the Turks.
And it's not just that they are ignoring the threat. They are actively punishing anyone who tries to warn them. When local foragers and light cavalry return to the camp with frantic rumors that a massive Turkish army is, in fact, rapidly approaching, the French command refuses to believe it.
It's willful ignorance.
The Constable of France actually threatens to cut off the ears of any soldier who spreads such cowardly gossip. They are willfully, aggressively blinding themselves to reality.
But reality is marching toward them at an astonishing, terrifying speed. Sultan Bayezid I is absolutely not a coward.
Not even close.
He is a brilliant, ruthless, highly energetic commander known by the nickname the Thunderbolt.
That tells you everything.
While the Crusaders are drinking wine and gambling outside the walls of Nicopolis, Bayezid is executing a grueling, incredibly disciplined, forced march through the treacherous Shipka Pass in the Balkan Mountains.
He is moving fast.
He is bringing a massive, highly organized army, and crucially, he isn't coming alone.
No, he's not. And this is a fascinating aspect of the Ottoman military structure that often gets overlooked. He brings Christian allies with him.
Wait, really? Christian allies fighting for the Ottomans against the Crusaders?
Yes. Bayezid is joined by his vassal Stefan Lazarevic, the ruler of Serbia. Lazarevic brings with him 1,500 elite Serbian heavy cavalry.
Heavy cavalry?
Yes. These are men clad in the exact same style of heavy plate armor as the French. Bayezid is moving with a logistical speed and a unified coordination that the fractured Crusader camp cannot even fathom.
The contrast is just staggering.
The Ottoman army's ability to march fast, utilizing light supply lines and strict discipline, allows them to close the distance before the Crusaders even realize they have left Greece.
On one side, you have these lethargic, divided, drunken revelers camped in the mud. On the other, a highly focused, rapidly advancing military machine.
A disaster waiting to happen.
And the Crusaders only wake up to the true danger when a deep scouting mission finally confirms the terrifying truth. The Duke of Wallachia, whose light cavalry are actually doing their jobs, reports back to the camp on the scale of the Ottoman force cresting the hills to the south.
And the psychological shock to the Crusader camp is profound.
I bet.
Johann Schiltberger later remembered the panic. He recorded hearing rumors in the camp that the scouts saw 20 massive banners with 10,000 men marching under each one.
200,000 men.
Now, mathematically, that number 200,000 men is wildly, impossibly inflated. But its historical value isn't in its accuracy.
What is it then?
Its value is that it reflects the sheer, paralyzing terror that gripped the common soldiers and squires when they realized the magnitude of what was suddenly upon them. The festival died instantly.
The hangover is over. The brutal reality sets in. So on the evening of September 24th, the commanders hold a fatal war council in King Sigismund's tent.
A very tense meeting.
Sigismund, who has spent his entire reign fighting the Ottomans and actually understands their tactics, lays out a perfectly sound, highly pragmatic battle plan.
He knows what to do.
He says to the French, "Look, I know how Bayezid fights. The Turks always put their untrained, conscripted light infantry in the very front line. It is a meat shield.
Just there to absorb the blow.
Exactly. It is designed to absorb your charge, break your momentum, and exhaust your horses. So do not charge them. Let me send my Wallachian foot soldiers and light cavalry first.
The smart move.
Right. They have experience fighting in this theater. They will engage the vanguard, they will absorb the shock, they will clear the field of traps, and then, only once the elite enemy lines are exposed and engaged, your heavy French cavalry can deliver the crushing, decisive blow.
Tactically, structurally, it is the only correct move. It is textbook combined arms warfare.
Good.
But politically, within the rigid, incredibly fragile confines of French chivalric ego, it is deemed an unforgivable, mortal insult.
They just can't take it.
The Constable of France, Du, and the other Burgundian lords absolutely explode in outrage inside the tent.
We really have to explain why they reacted this way.
Yeah.
We keep calling them arrogant, but nobody walks into a trap on purpose just to be stubborn, right? What were they actually thinking?
To understand their outrage, you must understand chivalry not just as a code of politeness, but as a rigid socio-economic and military doctrine.
Okay, unpack that for us.
In Western Europe, your entire social worth, your political power, your claim to your lands, and your family's legacy were entirely justified by your willingness to bleed in the vanguard.
Ah, so it's their entire identity.
It was a social currency. To take the rear, to let peasant footmen from Wallachia strike the first blow, would be to publicly admit that the knights were secondary.
That they weren't the heroes.
Right. It would destroy their credibility back home in the courts of Paris. It wasn't just a bruised ego. To them, it was social and political suicide. They demand the right to charge first, aggressively declaring that anyone who steps in front of their horses is doing them a mortal insult.
So it's less like ignoring sound advice out of mere pride, and more like a modern CEO refusing to take life-saving advice from a junior intern because doing so in front of his hostile board of directors would destroy his authority.
That's a great analogy.
They're trapped by their own system. And the young Count of Nevers, the nominal 24-year-old leader who should be managing this, completely folds to the intense pressure of the older hawks.
He had no spine for it.
The disastrous decision is made. The French will take the vanguard. They will charge blindly into the unknown.
Which brings us to the foggy, chilling morning of September 25th, 1396, the dawn of the catastrophe.
Let's set the scene.
The French knights, clad from head to toe in gleaming heavy plate armor, organize themselves under their massive silk banners. They ride out onto the plain, positioning themselves with their backs to the dark waters of the river Danube, looking up at the gentle hills ascending to the south.
Okay.
The Ottoman vanguard is just visible, descending the slopes. Without waiting for King Sigismund's infantry to form up and secure their flanks, without waiting for the archers, the French initiate the charge.
Just going right for it.
Yep.
I want you to imagine the absolute sensory overload of that singular moment. Thousands of massive war horses kicking up huge clods of damp earth, the deafening rhythmic roar of hooves that you literally feel deep in your chest.
The ground shaking.
The glint of the morning sun finally breaking through the mist to reflect on polished steel. The terrifying battle cries. They hit the Ottoman front line of light infantry like a massive steel sledgehammer.
And the thing is, it works.
Wait, it works?
Initially, yes. They absolutely crush the untrained conscripts, trampling them underfoot, driving them back in a bloody panic. For a few glorious, adrenaline-fueled minutes, as they carve their way through the fleeing infantry, the French truly believe they are winning.
Oh, wow.
They think they have routed the entire Turkish army in a single stroke.
But it is an illusion, a carefully orchestrated mirage, right?
Exactly. As the French push aggressively through the fleeing vanguard, their horses blowing hard, they suddenly encounter the true brilliance of Bayezid's defensive preparations.
The trap.
Hidden just behind the light infantry, obscuring the slope of the hill, are rows upon rows of deeply embedded, sharpened wooden stakes.
Oh, no. Let's talk about the physics of this trap, because it is brutal. A medieval destrier, a war horse carrying a fully armored knight, weighs well over 1,000 pounds and is moving at immense speed.
Fast and heavy.
When it hits an angled, sharpened stake.
The results are violently catastrophic. The stakes are designed specifically to skewer the soft, unarmored stomachs and chests of the charging horses.
God, that's awful.
The momentum of the massive, heavy cavalry charge is violently, instantly broken. Horses are deeply impaled, screaming in agony, thrashing wildly. Knights are thrown violently from their saddles into the mud.
Total chaos.
The cohesion of the charge disintegrates into absolute chaos.
It is a nightmare scenario. And now you have heavily armored men, already exhausted and overheated from the initial charge, forced to dismount.
Yeah.
They are desperately trying to pull up these deeply embedded wooden stakes with their bare armored hands to clear a path. And while they're doing this, they are taking blistering, highly accurate arrow fire from thousands of trained Turkish archers positioned safely behind the barricades.
We must consider the physical toll here. Fighting uphill, on foot, in mud, wearing plate and chainmail that weighs anywhere from 40 to 60 pounds is an immense cardiovascular strain.
You'd be suffocating.
Your vision is restricted by your visor. You are gasping for air. But we must give credit where it is due. The martial skill and sheer physical endurance of these French knights is undeniable.
They didn't just give up.
No. Driven by absolute desperation, rage, and the adrenaline of survival, the dismounted knights actually managed to hack their way through the stakes.
That's incredible.
They break through the line of archers and heavy infantry. Sweating, bleeding, taking heavy casualties, they force their way step by bloody step up to the plateau at the very top of the slope.
They must have thought they won.
They believe they have endured the worst. They believe they have finally broken the enemy's center. They expect to look over the ridge and see a fleeing, broken army.
But they don't.
No, they don't.
As they crest the hill, panting, exhausted, their armor dented and slick with blood, they look down the reverse slope and see a massive, entirely fresh, completely untouched corps of Bayezid's elite Sipahis waiting in perfect formation.
Just waiting for them. And we need to explain the Sipahis. These are not untrained conscripts. The Sipahis are the elite land-holding heavy cavalry of the Ottoman Empire.
The best of the best.
They are highly disciplined, heavily armored, and they fight in strict coordination. Sultan Bayezid had intentionally held them back in reserve, calmly watching the French completely exhaust themselves fighting up the hill.
He let them tire themselves out.
Exactly. And now, at the moment of maximum crusader vulnerability, the trap springs.
The Sipahis surge forward. The air is suddenly filled with the terrifying sound of Turkish trumpets, the rhythmic banging of kettle drums, and thousands of voices shouting battle cries.
The noise alone would be terrifying.
It is a perfectly timed, overwhelmingly powerful counterattack against an enemy that has completely spent its physical momentum and lost its formation.
And the French knights realize instantly how utterly desperate their situation is. Some lose their nerve, turn, and attempt to flee back down the steep slope, only to be cut down.
Nowhere to run.
The rest stand their ground and fight a brutal, hopeless, heroic holding action. The great French standard bearer is struck down, the banner falling into the mud.
The symbol of their pride, just gone.
The 24-year-old Count of Nevers, the Duke of Burgundy's son who led them into this trap, finds his personal bodyguard completely overwhelmed. Seeing no escape, his surviving men throw themselves to the ground, desperately pleading for his life to be spared for ransom.
Because he's worth so much money.
Right. He is taken prisoner. And with their high commander captured, the French line completely irrevocably collapses.
Let's zoom back in on young Johann in the valley below.
Right, our 16-year-old squire.
He is in the absolute suffocating meat grinder of this chaos. The orderly lines of the morning have vanished. He is watching the seemingly impenetrable armor of his childhood idols being cracked open by maces and poleaxes.
His whole world is falling apart.
He sees his own lord, Leinhard McCardigan, get his horse shot out from under him, crashing heavily to the ground. The crush of terrified bodies is suffocating. The noise, the screaming of men and horses, the clash of steel is deafening.
Just unimaginable.
But Johann, this 16-year-old kid, somehow braves the sheer panic. He scrambles through the deadly melee, finds his fallen master, and utilizing incredible strength born of pure adrenaline, manages to help his lord onto his own horse.
Wow.
Then, acting purely on base survival instinct as the Ottoman cavalry sweeps down the hill, Johann dives through the carnage, grabs the reins of a riderless, panicked Turkish horse, and manages to mount it just in time to escape the immediate slaughter of the vanguard.
But the battle is far from over. Because as the French are systematically annihilated and captured on the plateau, the fresh Ottoman Sipahis sweep down the flanks of the hill to envelop the rest of the Crusader army waiting on the plain below.
The ones who stayed behind.
Right. King Sigismund, the Hungarian forces, the German mercenaries, and the heavily armored Knights Hospitaller are now engaged in a desperate, confused, and unimaginably brutal melee to try and save the day.
And the combat down on the plain is pure chaos. Riderless horses are stampeding blindly through the ranks, breaking formations.
Yeah, that destroys any organized defense.
Seeing the absolute slaughter of the supposedly invincible French vanguard, the Wallachian and Transylvanian contingents, the very men who knew the reality of Ottoman power, pragmatically conclude that the battle is entirely lost.
I know when to run.
They break ranks and abandon the field, fleeing back toward their homelands, which fatally weakens Sigismund's defensive lines.
Yet, astonishingly, Sigismund's core central forces actually hold their ground. They lock their shields, brace their spears, and fight with a savage, desperate determination.
They don't just fold.
No. The massacre is unspeakable on both sides. The Ottoman lines take heavy casualties trying to break the Hungarian center. But the Christian lines are holding. They might even be able to fight their way to an organized retreat until the final, decisive, fatal blow is struck.
And this is the great, bitter irony of Nicopolis. The turning point, the moment the battle is irrevocably lost for the Crusaders, comes from the swords of fellow Christians.
Yes. The 1,500 elite Serbian heavy cavalry under the command of Stefan Lazarevic have been waiting patiently in reserve on the Ottoman side.
Waiting for their moment.
I must remember, Lazarevic is Bayezid's brother-in-law and a sworn vassal. His political survival depends entirely on the Sultan's favor. Seeing Sigismund's lines wavering but still holding, Lazarevic is ordered to deliver the killing blow.
Oh, man.
He orders the charge. The fresh Serbian knights riding heavy war horses smash directly into the exhausted, bleeding flanks of the Crusaders.
It is the devastating, inescapable impact. The Serbian charge completely shatters the remaining defensive formations. The line buckles, breaks, and shatters. King Sigismund's royal banner falls.
The ultimate symbol of defeat.
The grand, unified coalition army instantly dissolves into a terrified, wildly fleeing mob.
King Sigismund himself, a veteran of these wars, realizes instantly that it's over. The battle is lost, and if he is captured, the Kingdom of Hungary falls.
So he runs.
He abandons his disintegrating army. Accompanied by a few loyal nobles and the Grand Master of the Hospitallers, he cuts his way through the chaos to the banks of the river.
A desperate escape.
They scramble onto a small fisherman's boat and row out over the dark water to the safety of the Venetian ships waiting in the center of the Danube.
Imagine the hollow, sickening feeling in Sigismund's chest. He stands on the deck of the Venetian galley, safe upon the water, and watches as the army he spent years begging for.
The army that cost half the wealth of Europe to assemble.
Right. He watches it systematically slaughtered, run down, or captured in the mud on the riverbanks. The grand, colorful arrogance of the morning has devolved into the absolute, terrifying horror of the afternoon.
As the sun begins to set, the adrenaline of the battle slowly fades, leaving only the cold, calculated, deeply sobering reality of the aftermath.
And silence after the slaughter.
Sultan Bayezid rides out, surrounded by his guards, to tour the battlefield. He is looking at the tens of thousands of bodies covering the hills and the plain, and what he sees staggers him.
The sheer cost of victory.
The number of his own men who have fallen is immense. His elite forces, his infantry, his archers have been decimated by the desperate, savage ferocity of the trapped Crusader assault.
So it wasn't an easy win for him either.
His grief at the loss of so many loyal soldiers is profound. But as he rides further, following the trail of destruction back toward the Crusader camp, that grief metastasizes into a boiling, uncontrollable, terrifying rage.
Because Bayezid discovers the town of Oryahovo.
Yes.
He finds the smoldering, blackened ruins. He finds the streets choked with bodies. He finds the corpses of the 1,000 Muslim and local Christian hostages that the French had senselessly massacred in cold blood just days earlier.
Such a pointless atrocity.
The Crusaders had slaughtered unarmed prisoners, women, and children. And Bayezid, looking at this profound horror, decides that the blood spilled in the heat of battle is absolutely not enough to balance the scales.
He wants revenge.
He issues a terrifying order. All Crusader prisoners, regardless of rank, are to be rounded up, heavily guarded, and brought before him at the break of dawn.
Which brings us precisely back to the chilling, atmospheric moment where our deep dive began.
Right, the misty morning of September 26th.
Bayezid constructs a terrifying, highly calculated theater of revenge. He does not act blindly. He has his officials systematically walk through the huddled masses of prisoners and identify the absolute highest value nobles.
The ones who caused all this.
The Count of Nevers, the Marshal Boucicaut, the highest-ranking lords of France and Burgundy. He pulls them from the ranks. He does not execute them.
Because they're too valuable.
He spares them strictly because they are worth astronomical kingdom-bankrupting ransoms. But his mercy is infinitely cruel. He forces these proud, arrogant lords to stand right beside his throne, and he forces them to watch what happens to the men they led to destruction.
And there, in the mud, is 16-year-old Johann. He is bound by a single rough cord to 3 other men. His hands are tied so tightly his fingers are numb.
He must have been terrified.
He has been stripped of his armor, left only in a thin shirt, shivering violently in the dawn air. He is looking up, and he is watching the highest, most untouchable nobility of Europe forced to stand helpless, weeping, as the foot soldiers, the young squires, the loyal retainers, are dragged forward by the guards.
The men who trusted them.
He watches the executioners sever limbs and decapitate men in groups of 3 or 4. The sheer volume of blood soaking into the ground creates a thick, horrific mire.
But even in this absolute abyss of human cruelty, there are flashes of incredible stoic defiance.
Right.
Johann, years later in his memoirs, specifically recorded the final moments of a Bavarian noble named Hansen Grief.
What did he do?
Bound, kneeling in the mud and facing the executioner's raised blade, Grief does not beg. He does not weep. He looks around, he sees the absolute terror in the eyes of the young soldiers and squires waiting in line, and he raises his voice.
Defiant to the end.
He yells out over the sound of the blades, telling his men to stand firm. He tells them that their blood is being spilled for their faith and that they must meet their end with the courage expected of them.
Wow.
He refuses to show the Sultan fear. He kneels straight, and he is beheaded along with his companions.
Johann is standing there, watching this unimaginable bravery. The line moves forward. He is mere inches away from the blade. His 3 companions, tied to the exact same rope, are dragged roughly forward.
It's his turn.
The executioner raises the heavy sword, the blood dripping from the steel. Johann closes his eyes. And in that fraction of a second, an absolute miracle happens.
Just unbelievable timing.
Sultan Bayezid's young son, who is watching the proceedings, spots Johann. He sees a 16-year-old kid, barely more than a child, pale, trembling, entirely helpless in the blood-soaked mud.
A moment of humanity.
The prince is moved by sudden, inexplicable pity. He signals the guards. Johann is violently pulled from the rope, yanked out of the line of death, spared merely because he is visibly under the age of 20.
Saved by his youth.
The executions continue relentlessly without him, claiming anywhere from 300 to 3,000 lives over the course of the day, until finally, Bayezid's own ministers fall to their knees and beg the Sultan to stop, terrified that the wrath of God will fall upon them for spilling so much blood after the battle had ended.
It is absolutely vital here that we step back and look at this horrifying sequence of events with complete historical impartiality.
Right, we can't take sides.
We cannot project modern morality onto it. The massacre of the hostages at Rachowa by the Christian crusaders and the subsequent mass execution of the bound prisoners at Nicopolis by the Ottoman forces are both stark, unfiltered reflections of the grim, brutal realities of 14th century warfare.
It was just a different, darker world.
Neither side possessed the moral high ground. Both armies utilized terror, mass slaughter, and the cynical breaking of treaties as standard instruments of war and psychological revenge.
It was expected.
It was an era where a common human life was entirely expendable, and the conventions of mercy were dictated almost exclusively by a man's ransom value, or, in Johann's miraculous case, the fleeting, unpredictable whims of a prince's pity.
Johann is spared the blade. But as he stands shivering behind the Ottoman lines, the realization sets in. His life as a free man, his identity as a Bavarian, is entirely over.
He's a slave now.
The narrative now shifts from the grand, thundering clash of empires to an intensely personal, grueling, decades-long endurance test. Because the surviving prisoners are not given a moment to grieve their friends or recover from their wounds.
No time at all.
They are stripped naked or down to mere ragged shirts. They are denied shoes. Their hands are tightly bound in long columns. And they are forced to begin a brutal 350-mile death march across the incredibly rugged, unforgiving terrain of the Balkans.
Heading toward the Ottoman port city of Gallipoli.
350 miles without shoes.
The physical and psychological toll of this march is almost impossible to overstate. These are men who have just survived a catastrophic, highly kinetic battle. They are exhausted.
And wounded.
They are likely suffering from infected wounds, severe dehydration, and they are deeply traumatized by the massacre they just witnessed. They are beaten constantly by their captors to keep moving over the Rocky Mountain passes.
What happened if they couldn't walk?
Those who fall behind, those whose feet bleed too much to walk, or those who simply collapse from exhaustion are summarily executed and left by the side of the road to die.
It's just endless cruelty.
When the ragged, starving survivors finally stagger into Gallipoli on the coast, the segregation based on wealth begins again. The high-value noble captives are placed in the relatively comfortable upper rooms of a large stone tower, while the common prisoners, the squires, the runners like Johann, are locked away in the dark, damp, suffocating lower levels.
And while they're locked in that stone tower, nursing their wounds in the dark, one of the most haunting, almost cinematic moments of the entire campaign occurs.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
The prisoners manage to drag themselves up to look out the narrow, barred windows of the tower, looking out over the dark waters of the strait. And what do they see passing by in the distance?
It's just devastating.
They see a highly decorated Venetian ship sailing past. And standing on the deck of that ship, perfectly safe, completely untouched by the mud and the blood, is King Sigismund of Hungary.
Their king.
He is escaping back to the safety of Europe. The Turkish guards line the shores below the tower. They point at the magnificent ship, they blow their war horns, and they mockingly yell out over the water, challenging Sigismund to come back and rescue his loyal comrades.
The absolute ultimate humiliation.
The king sails away, disappearing over the horizon, leaving his grand army behind in chains.
The fate of the captives diverges sharply and permanently at this point. After spending 2 miserable months in Gallipoli, they are transported across the strait to the Ottoman capital in Asia, the city of Bursa.
What happens to the nobles?
For the high nobility, the Count of Nevers, Boucicaut, and their peers, their captivity immediately transforms into a matter of intense, high-stakes international diplomacy.
Because of the money.
Word of the staggering catastrophe finally reaches Paris in December, delivered by a few ragged survivors. It sends the entire French court and the public into absolute mourning. The bells of the churches toll endlessly across the country. It is a national trauma.
We have to look at the economics of this. The Sultan demands 200,000 gold florins for their release.
Yes. 200,000 gold florins is an astronomical, kingdom-destabilizing sum of money.
How do they even get that?
A massive, highly complex financial mechanism is activated across Western Europe. It involves the Duke of Burgundy aggressively taxing his peasantry, the King of France desperately borrowing funds, the merchant banks of Venice negotiating transfer fees, and the Knights Hospitaller acting as middlemen.
So everyone is paying for this mistake.
The economic shockwave of this single ransom requirement was so severe it literally destabilized national treasuries and caused localized economic depressions. They melted down church silver to pay for the arrogance of their lords.
But absolutely nobody in the courts of Paris or Burgundy is raising a single gold florin for a 16-year-old runner from Bavaria.
No, of course not.
Nobody is melting down silver for Johann. When the nobles are finally ransomed, then ride slowly back to France in 1398, ironically, demanding luxury travel arrangements and grand feasts, even in the shame of their defeat.
Typical.
Yeah. The common soldiers are just left behind in Asia to rot.
And this is where Johann's unbelievable, almost superhuman resilience truly shines. He is left behind. He vanishes completely into the massive churning machinery of the expanding Ottoman Empire.
What did he do?
He is sold as a slave. He is forced to learn the Turkish language. He is forced to convert or at least outwardly assimilate. He serves various high-ranking masters. Over the years, he is conscripted and forced to fight in foreign armies as a cavalryman.
Fighting other people's wars.
He is forced to march relentlessly across the Middle East, into the Caucasus, and deep into the steppes of Central Asia.
This journey is staggering. We are talking about a boy from a tiny village in Germany who ends up witnessing the rise and fall of entire Eastern empires.
He sees the world.
He marches to Egypt, he sees the Mamluks, he fights in brutal wars he doesn't understand, shedding blood for kings he doesn't know. He travels all the way to Siberia.
Johann's odyssey lasts for 30 agonizing years. 30 years of servitude, mere survival, and profound, crushing psychological isolation in a completely alien world.
30 years.
He travels further east into Asia than almost any recorded European of his time. He survives plagues, forced marches, and the collapse of dynasties.
And he makes it back.
It is only after 3 decades of this existence that he finally manages a desperate, incredibly dangerous escape, fleeing across the Black Sea, hiding on merchant ships, and making the perilous months-long journey back through Eastern Europe.
and he finally sets foot in his home region of Bavaria in the year 1427. It is genuinely staggering to stop and think about the psychological weight of that return. I want you to imagine it. You leave your quiet village at the age of 16, thinking you are going on a glorious, brief summer adventure. You witness the absolute apocalypse of your entire worldview. You watch your closest friends brutally butchered in the mud. You endure 30 years of slavery across foreign continents.
We're a lifetime of trauma.
And you don't see the hills of your home again until you are a middle-aged man in your late 40s. How does a human being even begin to reintegrate into a local society that has naturally assumed they have been dead in a ditch for 3 decades?
They can't comprehend what he's been through.
Exactly. He returns to a world that has completely moved on without him, bringing with him memories of exotic cities, immense violence, and a vast world that his neighbors cannot even begin to comprehend. He must have felt like a living ghost.
And while Johann's personal tragedy and ultimate survival is a profound human story, we must now pan out from his individual experience.
The bigger picture.
We must return to the geopolitical landscape to understand the massive macro-level tragedy for the Christian West. We must answer the fundamental question of why this single battle at Nicopolis permanently altered the trajectory of world history.
Why did it matter so much?
The ultimate lesson of Nicopolis is not just that the Turks were strong, it is a lesson of profound structural failure in the West. The Crusaders were not merely defeated by superior Ottoman tactics, though Bayezid's use of terrain and reserves was undeniably brilliant.
Right.
They were defeated from the inside out. They were destroyed by their own crippling disunity, their staggering institutional vanity, their complete refusal to gather basic intelligence, and their absolute fatal inability to adapt their rigid military doctrine to the reality of the enemy they actually face.
They marched halfway across a continent and walked into a meat grinder, entirely blindfolded by their own massive egos.
That's exactly it.
And the geopolitical consequences of that arrogance were permanent. The Battle of Nicopolis wasn't just a lost skirmish that they could avenge the next year. It was an extinction-level event for the local Eastern European powers.
Exactly. It marked the absolute final death of the Second Bulgarian Empire. The ruler of Bulgaria was captured, his remaining forces destroyed.
No.
The entire region of the Balkans, the vital buffer zone holding the Ottomans out of Central Europe, was permanently lost. It was swallowed up into an Islamic empire that would successfully rule over those lands for centuries to come.
And the psychological devastation that rippled across Western Europe cannot be overstated. We have to understand that for centuries, the absolute bedrock of European military confidence was the myth of Western knightly invincibility.
The armor, the horses.
Right. It was the unquestioned belief that heavily armored Christian heavy cavalry was the unstoppable, God-ordained apex of warfare. Nicopolis shattered that deeply held myth into a million pieces in a single bloody afternoon.
The shock was absolute. The treasury was entirely drained by the ransoms. The loss of a generation of experienced military leadership was severe.
It paralyzed them.
Because of this perfect storm of trauma, Western Europe would not dare attempt another unified, massive crusade to stop the Ottoman advance until the 1440s. For nearly 50 years, the great powers of the West were entirely paralyzed by the memory of the stakes at Nicopolis.
Half a century.
This overwhelming victory granted the Ottomans complete, unchallenged freedom of movement in the East. It allowed them to maintain immense, suffocating, constant pressure on the Byzantine capital of Constantinople.
The last domino.
It proved definitively to the entire world, to the courts of Paris, to the doges of Venice, to the emirs of the East, that the Ottomans were no longer just a regional threat.
Right, they were the main event.
They were no longer just a localized nuisance on the very edge of the map. They were a unified, highly competent global superpower, and they were now explicitly dictating the future of Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean Sea.
Think deeply about the foundational beliefs you hold right now, about your own society's security. Consider the complex systems, the international alliances, the advanced technology that you inherently believe keeps your world safe and stable.
Yeah, we all have that assumption.
Now imagine a single event, so sudden, so violently catastrophic, that it entirely shatters that deeply held sense of security in one afternoon.
It's terrifying.
Imagine an event that leaves a psychological scar so profound that it dictates the defensive foreign policy of multiple empires for half a century. That is exactly what the Battle of Nicopolis was to the medieval European mind.
It was the sudden, terrifying, inescapable realization that the fundamental rules of the world had violently changed, and they were no longer the undisputed masters of it.
It is a genuinely haunting thought.
Yeah.
To wake up and realize your armor no longer protects you. But before we end, I want to leave you with one final, deeply fascinating historical what-if to mull over in the quiet moments.
I love this one.
We've spent this time talking about the absolute, terrifying dominance of the Ottoman Empire after this battle, how they seemed completely unstoppable. But human history is never a clean, straight line, is it?
No, it is not. Despite his brilliant, crushing victory at Nicopolis in 1396, Sultan Bayezid's seemingly invincible reign would soon come to a violently abrupt and humiliating end.
Wait, what happened?
Just 6 years after Nicopolis, in 1402, Bayezid would march his army east to face a new, entirely unexpected threat. The terrifying Central Asian conqueror Timur, also known to history as Tamerlane.
Oh, wow, Tamerlane.
In a massive, apocalyptic clash at the Battle of Ankara, Bayezid was entirely defeated. The Thunderbolt was captured alive, locked in a cage, and died in captivity.
A cage?
His death threw the massive Ottoman Empire into a devastating, chaotic, decade-long civil war between his ambitious sons.
So the Ottoman state, the great terrifying monolith, was suddenly fractured, bleeding, and entirely vulnerable. And this raises the lingering, agonizing question that historians still debate.
The big what if?
If the great Christian powers of Western Europe hadn't completely annihilated their own elite armies and bankrupted their national treasuries at Nicopolis out of pure stubborn vanity just 6 years prior, what would have happened?
If the West had possessed a unified, healthy, well-funded military coalition in 1402, could they have easily swept down into the Balkans and entirely finished off the Ottoman Empire while it was tearing itself apart in civil war?
Could they have saved Constantinople half a century before its final tragic fall?
It's very possible.
Did the fragile hubris of a few French knights, arguing over who got the social prestige to charge first up a muddy hill in Bulgaria, inadvertently guarantee the survival and the future 500-year global dominance of the Ottoman Empire?
It is a question of cause and effect that echoes loudly through the centuries.
Thank you for joining us on this elusive journey today. Keep questioning the great turning points of history. Keep looking for the quiet survival of the Johanns in the shadows of the grand narratives. And always remember that sometimes the most deadly, inescapable enemy an army will ever face is its own pride. We'll see you on the next deep dive.